Masechet Menaḥot Daf Vav. On the previous daf, we saw a lengthy baraita that learned the law that a terefa animal cannot be a sacrifice from the words min habakad. Min habakad appears twice. The second one teaches that only some of bakad, a terefa animal, is not a valid sacrifice. Then the baraita wondered, why do you need min habakad? Can't you learn it from a kal vachomer? After all, ba'amum, an animal with a blemish, is permitted to a commoner, a regular person, can eat an animal with a blemish. It's kosher, and yet it's prohibited to put on the altar. So a terefa, which is prohibited to a commoner, it's not kosher, all the more so, it should be prohibited to a gavoa. So the kal vachomer is, the basis of the kal vachomer is from ba'amum. This is all going to be important today because we're going to revisit this basis. But then we reject the kal vachomer. It's good. We want to reject the kal vachomer because we want to learn this from min habakar. We need something to do with min habakar, and that's what we already said, that min habakar is teaching that terefa is out. So we're wondering, how about the kal vachomer? So we're going to try to refute the kal vachomer, and we do, because chaylev and dam can prove that those are prohibited to a regular person and permitted to gavoa. So you see a counterexample. If chaylev and dam are prohibited to a regular person and permitted to gavoa, then it could be terefa, would follow that model, like chaylev and dam also be prohibited to a regular person, but permitted to gavoa, so maybe terefa is permitted. And so this is an equal precedent to ba'amum, so this rejects the kal vachomer. But we reject this rejection because chaylev and dam, they come from something that is permitted. In other words, the whole body of the animal is permitted. It's only these parts that are prohibited to a regular person. So in that sense, it's more lenient. And maybe that's why it can be offered on the altar. You can't compare that to terefa, where the entire animal is prohibited to a regular person, and therefore that would not be permitted to a gavoa. So that's not a good comparison. All right, we bring a second comparison to reject the kal vachomer from milika, where if you do milika on a bird, the whole thing is prohibited. And that's prohibited to a regular person, but it's permitted to put on the altar. So maybe terefa should be like that. But then we say, no, milika, you know what makes it prohibited to a regular person? Not the fact that you did milika, the fact that it's consecrated already makes it prohibited to a regular person. At the time that Bishat Kiddushat Mizbech, already when you consecrate it, it's already prohibited. And before that, it's not. Which is not true for terefa, because a terefa, even before you consecrate it, if it's a terefa, it's already prohibited. And so you can't compare that either. And therefore, since we rejected these two rejections of the kal vachomer stands. So we can learn that terefa is no good as a sacrifice from a kal vachomer. So now we don't know why we need the bakar, the min habakar. The baraita ends in a curious way and says, Im heshabta, if you reject the kal vachomer, then you can learn that terefa is no good from the words min habakar. So now we're wondering, what do you mean im heshavta? If you have a refutation, what refutation does the baraita have in mind? So on the previous daf, we brought about 4 different tries, but we rejected all of them. And so now we're going to try again. And the goal is to refute the kal vachomer so that we have a use for min habakar. Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi Amar, Mishum Tika Lememar, Lihadar Dina Vetete B'Mahasad, Male Melika Sheken Kiddushata or Sarta, Chelev Adam Yochichu. Rav Shisha, the son of Rav Idi, is going to go back to the 2 counterexamples in the baraita, which were from Melika and Chelev Adam. And although the baraita rejected each one separately, but we have a concept that you can put them together and see the common denominator. So he says, you can say that let the let the logic return and come back with a common denominator argument. Just like milika, where kiddushata or sarta, so milika we rejected because milika, the bird, is already prohibited to a commoner from the time that it becomes hekdesh. But chelev adam will prove that that doesn't matter because the blood and the forbidden fat of an animal is prohibited all the time. Even before it's consecrated, a commoner is not allowed to eat the chalev and is not allowed to eat the dam. So you see that Kedushata or sarta is not an important factor. We reject in the Baraita, we rejected chelev and dam because it's only part of an animal that's prohibited, but the rest of the animal is permitted. And so we said, well, maybe that's why in those cases it's more lenient. But milika will prove that doesn't matter because milika, the whole bird, is prohibited. And so that will show that this factor of Ba'im Miklal Heted is not significant. So therefore, V'chazad Hadin, the inference can return. Lo re'izeh k're'izeh, ve'lo re'izeh k're'izeh. The unique aspects of this one is not the same as that one, and vice versa. Hasad hashaveh sheben sha'asurin lahediot mutirin lagavoa. The common denominator between the laws of Dam and Cheleb on the one hand and Milika on the other hand, the common denominator is that they are prohibited to a commoner, and they are permitted to put on the altar. So I can compare terefa also to those and say that terefa, even though it's prohibited to a commoner, so it's just like those two, and it's permitted to gavoa. And therefore, we see that the kal vachomer is rejected, and now that's why the Baraita says we need minan bakar. So now we would have an answer. We are happy. But there's a problem. No, you can't bring this argument from Dam and Cheleb and Milika because there the Torah specifies that there is a mitzvah to do the korban in this way. For Milika, it says specifically, you have to do Milika on a bird. In fact, you can't even do Shechita, you have to do Milika on a bird. So it's saying specifically something that is normally prohibited to a commoner, since the Torah says this is an exception to the rule. So you cannot compare terefa to an exceptional case. There is no mitzvah regarding terefa that you would sacrifice it. So therefore you can't compare it to milika. You also can't compare it to blood and cheleb, because these are prohibited as items to a regular person. The Torah specifically says you have to take the blood and sprinkle on the mizbeach. You have to take the fat and you have to burn it on the mizbeach. So the Torah goes out of its way to say specifically, this is the mitzvah. Therefore, you cannot learn a general law about terefa from something that is specifically commanded in the Torah. All right, so back to the drawing board. Rav Asher has a new methodology. Let us, instead of showing counterexamples, let us uproot the kal vachomer from its source. Where did we bring the kal vachomer from? From a blemish. Remember we said that a blemished animal is permitted to a commoner and is prohibited to the altar. Therefore, terefa, which is prohibited to a commoner, all the more so is going to be prohibited to the altar. So you brought your proof from a Baal Mum, but here's the thing: Baal Mum sheken asabo makribin kikrevin. A Baal Mum there has a stringency in that the same law applies to the Kohen who's doing the sacrifice, like the sacrifice itself. Just like a sacrifice that is blemished is no good, a Kohen who is blemished also cannot perform the sacrifice. So maybe that's why a blemished animal has this special stringency that you cannot offer it on the altar. But you can't prove from that to a terefa, because a Kohen who is a terefa, you can have a Kohen who's sick. He has some kind of disease, he's not going to make it for 12 months. Even if we know he has this disease, nevertheless, he is valid to serve in the Bet HaMikdash. And therefore, you can't bring a proof from Baal Mum, which is more stringent, and therefore you can't, a Baal Mum cannot be put on the altar. You can't bring that as a proof for terefa. Terefa is more lenient. It doesn't apply to the Kohen. Therefore, maybe a terefa you could bring on the Mizbeach. And so now we uprooted the kal vachomer altogether. That's why we need the derasha of min habakar. אמר לרב החסה לרב אשר, יוסי דופן יוכיח שלא עשה בו מקריבין כקרבין, מותר להג'ות ואסור לגבוה. But Rav Chasa tells Rav Asher, wait, okay, even if you can't bring a proof from Baal Mum, I could bring a proof from an animal that's born of a C-section. Born of a C-section, cannot be offered as a sacrifice. And it's permitted to a commoner, it's kosher. An animal that's born from a C-section is a kosher animal, and yet it's prohibited to bring as an altar. Now, regarding a Kohen, there's no law. If a Kohen is born of a C-section, he can still serve in the Bet HaMikdash. There's no problem with that. And so the C-section issue does not have the problem that Baal Mum had, and therefore we could bring a Kal Vachomer. If an animal born of a C-section is kosher to a commoner and yet prohibited to the altar, then a terefa, which is prohibited to a commoner, all the more so should be prohibited to the altar. And it seems that these are equivalent laws. But we reject this too. No, but there's a stringency in a C-section in that if an animal is a firstborn and is born from a C-section, then doesn't have a kiddush of a firstborn. So that has a lower status. So it's less kadosh as a C-section because that it's not considered a firstborn. However, a terefa, if a terefa animal is born first, regular birth, then that animal is considered a bechor. It has kiddushat bechor. And so we see here that the terefa has a higher level of sanctity than a Yoseh Dofen. Maybe Yoseh Dofen, which has this lower level in that it doesn't have Kiddushat Bechor, maybe that's why it cannot be placed on the altar. But an animal that's born in Terefa, which does get Kiddushat Bechor, if it's born to Terefa and Kiddushat Bechor, obviously you're not going to sacrifice it, but still has Kiddushat Bechor in that you'd have to give it to a Kohen. So still, and you can't use it for yourself. So it still has Kiddushat Bechor. Therefore, Terefa, I might say, in fact, would be permitted to the altar, right? It's holier. And so therefore, this Kal Vachomer does not work either. But now we bring it back. Baal Mum Yochiach. No, the blemished animal will prove it because a blemished animal can have Kiddushat Bechor, so that will show that Kiddushat Bechor is not an important factor. Yeah, but Baal Mum had a problem because the Kohen who has a blemish also cannot serve, and so that's a stringency. Maybe that's why the Baal Mum cannot be placed on the altar. It doesn't apply to Terefa. But Yoseh Dofen Yochiach, but Yoseh Dofen will show that that's not an important factor because a Kohen who is born of a C-section can serve. So let's put these two laws together. V'chazad hadin lo re'izeh k're'izeh v'lo re'izeh k're'izeh asad ha'shaveh shebehen shemutarin lehejot v'asurin lagavoa v'kol sheken terefa she'asura lehejot tehe asura lagavoa. So we're going to bring the logic all the way around, and this the aspect that's special to this is not here, and vice versa. What's the common denominator between an animal that's a Baal Mum and an animal that's born of a C-section? Well, both of them are permitted to a commoner to eat and yet prohibited to sacrifice on the altar, and therefore we can use these both together as a Kal Vachomer to Terefa, which is prohibited to a Hejot, all the more so should be prohibited to Gavoa. And now we have a Kal Vachomer, which is a problem because we don't want to have a Kal Vachomer. So we can answer it by saying, Ma lesad hashaveh shebahen sheken lo teru mikelalan, tomar bitrefa shutera mikelala. Well, but there is a common denominator even between these two, which is that there is no case where these would be permitted as a sacrifice. You're never going to have a case where a blemished animal or an animal born of C-section will be permitted to sacrifice on the altar. So therefore, you cannot bring that as a proof for terefa, because there is a case where you can sacrifice a terefa. We're going to talk about a bird. A terefa bird can be sacrificed in a particular case, and therefore you see terefa has a leniency compared to those, and therefore, since it has a leniency, perhaps terefa in general could be sacrificed on the Mizbeach. Now, what is the case where terefa could be permitted? What is the case of a terefa that, although generally is prohibited, but a case where it would be permitted to sacrifice? Maybe you'll say it's milika of a bird that's an olah. When you do melikah, so the kohen is going to take his neck from the back of the animal, and he has to put it through the main pipes of through the throat. But since he's coming from the back, first he's going to sever the spine of the bird. Once he does that, severing the spine and the nerves there, it already becomes a terefah. So the bird actually becomes a terefah first while it's alive, and only then does it die. So actually, every bird that you do melikah on is a terefah bird, and yet it's totally permitted to offer it on the mizbeach. Ba'amum nameh be'ofot ishtaruye ishtare tamut vezachrut bibhema ve'en tamut vezachrut be'ofot. Wait a second, but don't bring me a proof from a bird, because a bird is also exceptional in that if a bird has a blemish, it's also permitted. Not a major blemish, not if it's missing a whole limb, but a minor blemish regarding a bird is okay to sacrifice. As we learned, the halacha is that tamut, meaning being tamim, being perfect, unblemished, and zachrut, being male, applies to an animal. An animal, it matters if it has a blemish or has a male. Some sacrifices have to be a male, some can be a female, but there's no such thing. We ignore its unblemished status or its male status. In the case of birds, it doesn't matter if a bird has a blemish or whether it's male or female. If you have a korban olah in an animal has to be male, but an olah in a bird does not have to be a male. And so don't bring me a proof from a bird, because a bird has lots of exceptions. So don't tell me that you're going to learn animal terefah animals are permitted because there's a case of a terefah bird that's permitted. Well, then you're going to have to bring in the exception of a blemished bird also. So you see that the bird laws don't apply to animals. Oh, I know. You can learn it from the fact that when you do a korban olah, you do melikah, it's all burnt. But when you do melikah and a korban hatat, then the kohanim eat the most of the body of the animal, all of the body of the animal. And so, since the hatat is permitted to kohanim. So you see that there are cases where terefah becomes permitted. You're doing melikah, you're severing the spinal cord first and making it terefah, and then the kohen is killing it, and yet the kohanim can eat it. So you see, terefah is more lenient than the other laws because there is such a thing as a terefah animal being permitted for commoners to eat. So maybe that's why the terefah animals also would be permitted to burn on the mizbeach. But we reject this also. Kohanim mishulchan gavoa kazachu. When kohanim are eating the bird chatat, it's not that they're eating it as cholin meat. They are the bird is given to them from the table of on high. In other words, they are permitted to share the food that's dedicated to Hashem. And so therefore, this is not a case of a terefah bird that's permitted to commoners. It doesn't become chulin, but rather it is an extension of the law that a terefah is permitted as a korban. The fact that in melikah you can give it to gavoa because just like there's no tamut regarding the bird, so the law of the law of terefah in fact does not apply to a bird korban because every bird korban is actually a terefah. The fact that kohanim can eat it doesn't make any difference. The kohanim are eating the sacrificial meat, so it's permitted because it's sacrificial meat. And once again, just because there's a case of a terefah in a bird that's permitted to put on the mizbeach, which in fact actually all cases of birds, you cannot prove from there anything about animals because the laws of birds do not apply to animals. Laws of blemishes in birds don't apply to animals either. Therefore, the kal vachomer stands. We in fact have a kal vachomer from the common denominator between Ba'al Mum and Yotzei Dofen, and since those are permitted to a commoner and yet prohibited to the altar, so terefa all the more so, since it's prohibited to a commoner, should be prohibited to the altar. And so now we're left back with our original question. If we have this very nice kal vachomer, then why do we need the words min habakar? What was the Baraita thinking when it said, if you can reject this kal vachomer, how could you reject the kal vachomer? And so we have a final answer. Ve'ela parichachi, malas hadash shebehen, sheken muman nikar, tomad bitrefa sheken en muman nikar, mishum hachi isterich keram. We can reject the kal vachomer in this way, that regarding a blemished animal and one born by C-section, their blemish is clear. You can see it. If you have a blemished animal, so as it's missing a limb, it's missing something, it has a problem. Born a C-section, someone was there and saw that it was born from a C-section. So it's noticeable from the outside that this is no good. And that would be a reason to say that even though, yes, permitted to a commoner, it's kosher, but everybody knows that there's a problem with it, it's going to be prohibited to the altar. You can't compare that to a terefa, where a terefa, the mum is not necessarily noticeable. It could be something inside, a hole in the lung, and you wouldn't know that until you do shechita and open it up. And so since its blemish is not noticeable, one might think that it's more lenient. And a terefa, even though it's prohibited to a commoner, maybe it would be permitted to gavoa. Only something whose problem is noticeable can't be put on the altar. But terefa, its problem is not noticeable. So the kal vachomer is in fact rejected. And based on logic alone, I might think that a terefa could be sacrificed. And this is the answer. This is why we need the pasuk min habakar to say only some animals can be put on the altar. A terefa cannot be put on the altar. Now that we did all that work to show that the kal vachomer is not good, and that's why we need the phrase umin habakar to teach that a terefa cannot be sacrificed. Now we actually bring two other pisukim that can teach us the exact same law. Utrefa mehacha nafka. Is it true that the law of a terefa being invalid as a korban comes from the words min habakar mehatam nafka min mashke Yisrael min hamutar liYisrael? It comes from the pasuk mashke Yisrael. We've quoted this in the past, but actually here is the pasuk itself. Had min asur min hamatayim min mashke Yisrael, and one lamb out of the flock, out of 200, out of well-watered pastures of Israel. So the point is that when you bring an animal, it should be mimashke Yisrael. Simple meaning is that it should be a nice, a healthy animal that came from the well-watered pastures. The Midrash learns from here that it's only something that is permitted to a commoner, to a regular Jew, is permitted to bring as a sacrifice. And the terefa is prohibited for a regular Jew to eat, and therefore also is prohibited to the mizbeach. So we can learn it from here. And another pasuk, mi kol asher yabor tachat hashabet nafka perat li trefa she'ena overet. The system for having ma'asar behema, you have a whole bunch of animals that were born that year, and now you need to take a tenth of them, and that will be consecrated. So you have them pass single file under the rod, and you count, and there is 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, you mark that one, and so it has to walk under the rod. We learn from here that only if it can walk under the rod, that it's healthy and it can get there without a problem, then it can be a sacrifice. The ma'aser was going to be sacrificed by the owner. But that comes to exclude a terefa, which it cannot pass under the rod. It's too weak. If it's too weak, it can't get there. Then it is not a valid sacrifice in any case. So we can learn it from this pasuk also, that a terefa animal cannot be sacrificed. And now we answer Sirichi. Actually, we need all three pisukim because each one's going to cover a different subcase. Di mi mashke Yisrael hava amina lemut hechad elo haita la sha'ata kosher. If I only had the pasuk mashke Yisrael, something that a regular Jew can eat, can be sacrificed, but if a Jew can't eat it and Terefah Jew cannot eat, that's why it cannot be sacrificed. If only that pasuk, I would say it's only excluding an animal that was born a Terefah, that was never kosher, similar to orla, something that's born within the first 3 years of a tree, never is kosher, not even for one day. And something that is grown with diverse kinds in a vineyard also is disqualified for its entire existence. Since we're learning this from Mashkei Yisrael, which is referring to things that grow, so we're going to compare it and say maybe this only prohibits a terefah from birth. But if it at some point was a healthy animal and became terefah afterwards, maybe it can be a valid sacrifice. Since it was able to be at one time, maybe it continues to be a valid sacrifice even after it becomes terefah. That's why it says anything that passes under the rod. So that means even if it was healthy, but now it can't pass under the rod, it is no good. Fine. That's why I need the second pasuk. But if I only had that pasuk, and this pasuk, anything that passes under the rod, I would think this is coming to exclude from a valid sacrifice something that first became a terefah, maybe it was born healthy, but then it became a terefah, and only afterwards it became hekdesh. Just like maaser. When you have all the animals born, when they're born, none of them are hekdesh, and then before the cutoff time, you put them all under the rod, and then you make every 10th one hekdesh. It becomes hekdesh. So in this case, it's terefah first. It can't walk. And then it becomes maaser. That's when it would be no good as a sacrifice. Aval hikdisha ulabasofni terefah. But what if it was healthy and you consecrated the animal, and only afterwards it developed a sickness after it was consecrated? Maybe that could be sacrificed. Since at the time that I made it consecrated, it was fit to be a korban, maybe it continues and it can be sacrificed. That's why I need the third pasuk, the one that we started with. That's why it says min habakar, only some of the animals, and that excludes any terefah. Animal cannot be offered as a sacrifice. The next Mishnah is going to bring a long list of people who are invalid for doing kemitzah on a meal offering. Echad minchat chotev, echad kol ha-menaḥot. The following list applies both to the mincha offering of a sinner, that's an olev yored offering, and he's poor, and he brings just a plain flour offering, dry, no oil, or any korban mincha. The Gemara will discuss, well, if you're including all korban minchas in this category, then why do you have to specify minchat choteh? We'll see. Shekemasan, zar, אונן, טבול יום, מחוסר בגדים, מחוסר כיפורים, שלא רחץ ידיו ורגליו, ערל, טמא, יושב, עומד על גבי כלים, על גבי בהמה, על גבי רגלי חברו, פסול. If a non-Kohen does kemitzah, it's no good. Or someone who had a relative die the same day. Or someone who went to the mikveh, but he was tameh, but it didn't become dark yet. Or a kohen who was not wearing the clothing of a kohen. Or someone who did not complete his purification process by bringing the necessary korbanot that he has to bring at the end of the process. Or if a kohen did not wash his hands and his feet first, or if he's not circumcised, or if the kohen is tameh, or if he's sitting down, he has to be standing up, and he has to be standing on the floor of the courtyard with his feet touching the floor of the courtyard. If he's standing on top of a vessel, no good, or on top of an animal, no good, or even if he's standing on the feet of someone else, they might do that because in the winter the floor might be cold, but it doesn't matter. When you're doing the kemitzah, his own feet have to be directly on the floor, and if not, then the kemitzah is invalid. Kamatz bismol pasul. Like everything else, the kohen has to do the avodah with his right hand. If he does it with his left hand, it's no good. Ben betara omer yachzir v'yachazor v'yekmotz b'yamin. Ben betara says he agrees that you can't do it with your left hand, but he says you can fix it. If he did kemitzah with his left hand, then go back, put that flour back in the vessel and do kemitza again with the right hand, and then it'll be okay. Sounds like Tanna Kama would disagree with that. We'll see exactly what they are arguing about. Kamas ve'ala biyado siror, or garger melach, or koret shel levona pasul, mipnei shamru, hakomes hayater ve'hachaser pasul. If he does kemitza, the kemitza should be strictly flour that's in his hand. If he picks up a stone might get mixed in to the flour, or a grain of salt, or some frankincense, and that's in his hand, then the kemitza is no good, because the sages taught that if he does a kemitza that's too big or it's lacking, then it's no good. And these would be a case of lacking, because that volume that's taken up by that stone or that salt doesn't have flour there. So you have to make sure that when he's picking it up, that he's picking up only flour in his hand. What is a case of outsizing, oversized? That's when when he takes it, it doesn't fit in his hand. It's too much. He can't get his fingers all the way around it. It's overflowing. That is not a proper kometz. And what does it mean that if it's missing? That means if he only uses the tips of his fingers, you have to do a full grab, and only using the whatever little flour you can hold in your tips is not sufficient. So it has to be just right, not too little, not too much, that it's overflowing and you can't even close your hand. Gemara asks, why does the Mishnah have to say both korban minchat choteh and all menachot? Litnei kol menachot shekemasan zar ve'onen. To say all mincha offerings that the kemitza was done by a non-kohen or someone who's an onen, and I know that includes minchat choteh. Rabbi Shimon isterich detanya amar Rabbi Shimon bedin hu sheteh minchat choteh teuna shemin ulbona shelo yehe choteh niskar upinei ma ena teuna shelo yehe korbano mehudar. So we need that phrase minchat choteh to teach us that this is true also according to Rabbi Shimon. As we learn in a baraita, Rabbi Shimon says, really, by the letter of the law, a minchat choteh should require oil and frankincense. Most mincha offerings require oil and frankincense, and therefore, this poor sinner, really, he should have to also bring oil and frankincense. Why? So that a sinner should not benefit. You're saying, because you're a sinner, you only have to pay for the flour, very cheap, and you don't have to bother paying for the oil and frankincense. So because he sinned, he gets to benefit. Someone who doesn't sin, and he wants to bring a voluntary korban mincha, he has to pay extra. How much is yours? You have to pay $100 for yours because you have to oil and frankincense. But the sinner, how much for the sinner's one? Only $20. Only the flour. So it doesn't make sense that a sinner should have a benefit. And therefore, really from the letter of the law, we should require the sinner to bring oil and frankincense, so he has to pay more. It'll hurt. That'll be part of his atonement. So why, in fact, does the Torah say that a sinner doesn't have to bring the oil and frankincense, so that his korban will not be of superior quality? It will not be a beautiful korban, because he's a sinner. You're a sinner, you have to bring just a lowly, humble korban to show that you yourself are being humble. You're not proud of what you did. You're embarrassed. So you bring an embarrassing korban. And also, regarding an animal chatat, if someone ate cheleb, he has to bring an animal chatat. That should require libations. Like most korbanot require libations to bring with it. Shelo yeheh choteh niskar. And that would make sense that the sinner should not profit. Other people that bring a korban, they have to bring the wine libations. They have to pay extra for that. This guy sinned. He ate cheleb. So he doesn't have to pay as much? That doesn't make sense. So why indeed does a hatat offering, the owner does not have to bring the wine libations? So that his korban will not be beautified. He doesn't deserve a beautified korban. Someone else who wants to bring a nice korban, he can bring one. But the sinner should bring a lowly, humble korban to show his shame and embarrassment. סלקה דעתך אמינה, הואיל ואמר רבי שמעון שלא יהיה קורבנו מהודר, כי כמסי לה פסולין, נמי תתכשיר כמשמע להן. Now, I might have thought that since Rabbi Shimon says that a korban of a sinner, korban mincha, or an animal korban of a sinner should not be beautiful, I might have thought that if a non-Kohen does it, maybe also it should be kosher. If you would bring a beautiful mehudar one, the Kohen should come, he should do it. But you're bringing, you're a sinner, you're bringing a disheveled korban. You know what? Let anybody do it. Get anybody, not even a non-Kohen. I might think that to show his shame that we permit a non-Kohen to do it. And that's why he says, even a minchat choteh, where you might think that, according to Rabbi Shimon, maybe a zar would be valid to do the kemitzah. No, even for minchat choteh, everyone agrees. Even Rabbi Shimon says that a kohen has to do it. If so, if this is the logic here in this Mishnah in Masechet Menaḥot, why not have the same language in a parallel Mishnah Masechet Zevachim, where also it's talking about the fact that the various activities of an animal korban, it has to be done by a kohen and so on, and it brings the list of people that are disqualified. How come there it doesn't also say both a hatat cheleb and all korbanot, that if a non-kohen receives the blood or an onen receives the blood and so on? And then we would answer, you know why it mentions chatat cheleb? Because of Rabbi Shimon, you might think that since it's of a sinner and it's disheveled, maybe a non-Kohen could do it, and that's the teach that a Kohen can do it. But the Mishnah there does not have this language. The Mishnah there just says, all zevachim, and it doesn't bother to mention hatat chaylev. Alma kevan detanya le kol vela katanehus kulehu mashma. So we see there that regarding zevachim, the fact that it says all, and doesn't say an exception, that means everything is included, and so I know that hatat cheleb is also included. Hachanameh kevan detana kol vela katanehutz koluhu mashma. And well, in that case here also, since the Mishnah does say kol and doesn't give any exceptions, so I know that everything is included, and I don't need to specify minchat choteh just to teach me that for the Rabbi Shimon it would also require that just if saying kol is enough to tell me that. Isterich. So we finally answer, no, I need the minchat choteh here, specified, sakadatech amina, ho'il ve'okimna l'resha, delak Rabbi Shimon, sefanami delak Rabbi Shimon, kamashma lan. Here in Menaḥot, there is an additional reason to go out of my way to tell me that Rabbi Shimon would agree, because the first Mishnah we established is not according to Rabbi Shimon. The first Mishnah said that a korban mincha, that one does kemitzah, shelo lishma, it is valid but does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. We already learned that according to Rabbi Shimon, if a mincha offering is done for not lishma, then not only is it valid, it fulfills the obligation of the owner. So because the first Mishnah did not follow Rabbi Shimon, I might think that here also, this is not according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon would disagree. Therefore, this Mishnah goes out of its way to include minchat choteh, to say, Rabbi Shimon would agree with everything in this Mishnah. When it came to zevachim, there was no reason to go out of our way, because there Rabbi Shimon did not have a disagreement with the previous Mishnah, such that we would have to include him in the second Mishnah after that. So in Masechet Zevachim, it could just say, all Zevachim, Kohen has to do the receiving of the blood. But here, because the first Mishnah was not Rabbi Shimon, so it adds the words, also minchat choteh, and that we will know, this includes the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rav, zar shekamas yachzir. Now, Rav says about our Mishnah that if a non-Kohen did kemitzah, he can return it. He put it back, and then a Kohen will come and do it, and then it will be valid. Just because a non-Kohen took it doesn't make the whole thing invalid that you have to throw it out. You can do a redo with a proper Kohen. V'anan pasal tenan. Hold on, the Mishnah says pasul. Pasul usually means that's it. It's invalid. You got to throw it out and go get new flour. My pasal ad she'yachzir. No, you know what pasal means? It's invalid for now until he puts it back. If the non-Kohen puts it back, then it's okay again. Bring a Kohen and do it properly. You can do a redo. Wait a second. If that's true, then Tanakama is the same as Ben Betara. Ben Betara also said, if you took it with your left hand, put it back, and then take it with your right hand. So this would be the same. You know what? In fact, you're right. If the kometz is still there, it's still in existence, it's right there in his hand, or wherever he put it, so then there's no machloket. And the rabbis would agree with Ben Betara, if you took it with your left hand, put it back, and then take it with your right hand. A non-Kohen took it, you still have the flour? Yeah, it's still right here. Okay, put it back, and then a Kohen can take it. Everybody agrees that would be okay. It's not invalid forever. You can do a redo. Kepelige de chasar kometz. The machloket is only when he took it with his left hand. He took the kometz and then he lost it. Fell on the floor. He doesn't know where he put it. It's gone. Now what are you going to do? Rabbanan sabri lo yavi mibeto lo yavi mitoch beto v'imale'enu ben betara sabar yavi mitoch beto v'imale'enu. The rabbis say that kometz is missing. You can't go bring more flour from your home to fill it up. That's it. It's missing. It's gone. You got to start all over again. Ben betara, however, says, what happened? You took with your left hand. You made a mistake. Okay, go home. Get some more flour and fill it up again, and then you could use the same bowl, that same flour, just fill it up, and then you do it properly. That's the machloket. We ask, Ihachi ben Betara omer, yachzir v'yachzor v'yikmos biyamin. Ben Betara omer, yachzir v'yavi mitoch beto v'imale'ena v'yachzor v'yikmos biyamin miba'aleh. If so, that the machloket is only in the case where the kometz was lost, then the Mishnah's wording is not exact. The Mishnah, Ben Betara says, he should return and put the kometz back, and then take it again with the right hand. That's all it says. If the machloket was only in the case where it got lost, then it should say he should go again, go back home, bring some more flour, fill it up, and then go and do the kemitza again with the right hand. But the Mishnah doesn't say that. So you really have to have clearer language if you think the machloket was only in the case where the kometz was lost. Kika amar Rav leben Betara. And so we answer, you know what, actually, Rav was only explaining the opinion of Ben Betara. He was not giving his own opinion. He was not saying that he disagrees or that Rabbanan or explaining what Rabbanan think. He was only saying that, according to Ben Betara, and not only does Ben Betara disagree with the case of the left hand, if you read the Mishnah by itself, you might think that Ben Betara agrees in all the other cases. If a non-Kohen, an onen, and so on, does kemitza, then it's no good, it's invalid forever. And Ben Betara only argues on the last case. If it's a proper Kohen, but he does it with the left hand, he could put it back and do it with the right hand. I might think that Ben Betara disagrees only with that case. And so now Rav says, regarding Ben Betara, that's what this statement is on Ben Betara, the commentary on Ben Betara. Ben Betara thinks that also that applies to a Kohen who does kemitza. He can go back, a non-Kohen who does kemitza, okay, that's invalid, but if he puts it back and then a Kohen does it, that's okay. And so Rav was speaking about Ben Betara. Now we ask, Pishita, isn't this obvious? No, I might have thought that maybe Ben Betara only says you can do a redo if he takes it with his left hand. But how about everything else on the list? I might think, no, this is worse. He's not a Kohen. He's an onen. He's tameh. These are more serious problems than a proper Kohen taking it with his left hand. Maybe it's permanently invalid. And so that's why Rav is coming to teach me. Not so. Ben Betara would say you can do a redo of about everything on the list. And now we see, let's see, could we figure this out ourselves without Rav telling it to us? Maishana Semol. Why would Semol be more lenient than the other things? Because there are cases where some activity in the Bet HaMikdash can be done with the left hand, like on Yom Kippur. When the Kohen Gadol is going into Kodesh Kodashim, he has to hold two things, so he needs both hands. He has to hold the coals in the right hand and the incense in the left hand as he goes in, and then he mixes it together. So you see that he's using his left hand for something. Since the left hand can be used on Yom Kippur, so it's not totally disqualified. And that is why Ben Betara would say, listen, if you did the Kemitzah with the left hand, it's not permanently disqualified. Put it back and do it again. So that would be a reasoning why, with the left hand, you can have a redo. But in that case, Zar Nameh Ashkechan Lahech Shera B'Shechita. We have a case also where a non-Kohen can do a sacrificial service, because a non-Kohen can do Shechita on an animal. You don't need a Kohen to do that. And therefore, I don't need Rav to teach me that Ben Betara would say his opinion also regarding a Zar, because I could figure out myself that a Zar, since he could do Shechita, you see, Zar is not totally bad. So if a Zar did Kemitzah, you don't invalidate the whole thing, put it back, and then we'll do a redo with a proper Kohen. And we answer to that, no. A Zar doing Shechita is not the same. Shechita lav avodahi, because Shechita is not an official sacrificial service. The proof is that a non-Kohen can do it. So therefore, of course, Shechita, whoever's doing it has to do it right, with intention and all that, but it's actually not a part of the official sacrificial service, and therefore there's no proof to the fact that a Zar can do Shechita. That doesn't mean that a Zar is in some way somewhat valid, and so actually we wouldn't know it unless Rav had taught it to us. We ask, Velo, v'amar bizer amarav, shechitat para bezar pesula, v'amar Rav ala elazar v'chuka ketib ba. Wait a second, is that true that shechita is not an official sacrificial service? Rav said that if you have a para aduma, the shechita has to be done by a kohen. If a non-kohen does it, then it's no good. And not only does the Torah say that a kohen has to do it, Rav says about that the pasuk says Elazar the kohen, and it says the word chukah. When it says the word chukah, that means you have to do it precisely this way. Elazar, or in the future, other kohanim, have to do the shechita, and Azar cannot do the shechita. So you see that shechita must be a sacrificial rite, because here in Paraduma, it's necessary that a Kohen should do it. And therefore, I could figure it out myself, and I don't need Rav, because since a Zar can do shechita in other cases, that means that a Zar is somewhat valid. And that would make sense that Ben Betara would therefore agree that if a Zar does Kemitzah, you can redo it. No, we answer, Shane Parad de Koche Bedeka Baiti. Don't bring me a proof from Paraduma, because Paraduma is not an example of a sacrifice. Doesn't have Kiddushat Haguf. It's not consecrated as a sacrificial animal. In fact, you don't bring it as a sacrifice. The shechita is done outside of the walls of Yerushalayim. It does not go on the Mizbeach. It's slaughtered outside. The blood is sprinkled towards Kodesh, but not in the Kodesh. And so therefore, you see, it's actually not a sacrifice. Its level of Kiddusha is only monetary. Koche bedek habayit. And so, you can't bring me an example from Paraduma that shechita is a sacrificial rite. It's not a sacrifice at all. Velav, kol dekenhu, wait a second, then I could bring a kavachomer. Koche betek habayit ba'u kehuna. Koche mizbeach lo ba'u kehuna. If an animal that is only bedek habayit, is only for its value, monetary value, and you need a kohen to do shechita, then a sacrifice that goes on the mizbeach, all the more so, you require a kohen. And therefore, we will learn that doing shechita is a sacrificial service. And then we could figure out Rav's law ourselves. Amar Rav Shisha bere de Rav Idi midi dehava amarot negaim de Rav avodaninu uba'e kehuna. So no, this kavachomer is not good, because we have other examples of things that a kohen has to do, even though it's not a sacrificial service. For example, examining leprous marks. Only a kohen can look at a leprous mark on someone's skin and say, this is sarat, or it's not sarat. Even sometimes, if a Kohen is not so sure, he's not so learned, you might have a Chacham who's not a Kohen look at it. But even the Chacham, even if he's the most learned person in the world, can ask to tell the Kohen, hey Kohen, say it's Tameh. So this is something only a Kohen can do. But it's not a sacrificial service. It's just one of the laws that only a Kohen can do. So too here, Para Aduma is not a sacrificial service. It's just that it's a non-sacrificial service that happens to require a Kohen. And therefore you cannot learn from Para Aduma that Shechita is a sacrificial service, and therefore you actually for sacrifices, one does not need a Kohen for Shechita, which means that Shechita is not a sacrificial service. Therefore, you can't learn that there is a precedent for a Zad being somewhat valid, and therefore we would not know the law of Rav by ourselves, because we only have the precedent of the Kohen Gadol, who uses his left hand. Oh, that's why, since he uses his left hand, and on Yom Kippur, therefore, Ben Betera would say that if he uses his left hand for the Kemitzah, all right, you know what? Redo. You're allowed to do a redo. But if a Zad did it, I wouldn't have a precedent, and that's why I need Rav to tell me that Ben Betera agrees regarding a Zad, that if a Zad did the Kemitzah, it's not permanently invalid, put it back, and then a Kohen can do it again. V'nelaf mi bama. Now we ask once again, why does Rav need to teach me that according to Ben Betera, if a non-Kohen does Kemitzah, then he can put it back and renew it? Couldn't we figure that out ourselves from Bama? At a time when Bamot were permitted, a non-Kohen was permitted to perform all of the sacrificial services. So since a Zad is valid in some case, therefore, we could figure out ourselves that according to Ben Betera, just like a left hand is permitted in some cases, and because of that, if he did Kemitzah with his left hand, it's not totally invalid, it's a redo. Therefore also, since a Zad can do everything for a Korban at the time of Bamot, so too here, if a non-Kohen does Kemitzah, it's not permanently invalid. You can do a redo. So we can figure that ourselves, and I don't need Rav to tell me that. And if you'll say, no, we can't learn anything from Bama. Bama, that was in ancient times. At some points in history, for a few years here and there, Bamot were permitted. But now Bamot are prohibited. So you're going to say, no, we can't learn anything from the time of Bamot to the laws of the Bet HaMikdash. But actually, we do learn a law from the time of Bamot. It says, how do you know that if you had sacrificial meat limbs that are supposed to be put on the Mizbeach, and they were taken out of the courtyard, now they're taken out of the courtyard, they're invalid, and you're not supposed to put them on the Mizbeach. But b'di'avad, if someone came and put them on the Mizbeach, you leave them there and you don't take them down, how do you know? Because there is such a thing that's like this, that is kosher at the time of Bamot, where Bamot was not in any, and it could be anywhere. So there's no such thing as taking it outside. There's no problem of taking it outside in a Bama. So since at the time of Bamot, taking sacrificial limbs outside was okay, so too now, even though now it's prohibited, since there was a time it was valid, therefore even now, if b'diavad you put on the Mizbeach, it's okay. So you see here is the halacha that we do learn from Bamot. So why can't we learn this law from Bamot also? Tana azot Torah ta'olah semichle. And over there, actually, the law of what can go on the Mizbeach and stay there is learned from a pasuk that says, Zot, this is the law of Olah, that which ascends. And since it ascended, it doesn't descend. We know that there are things that can ascend that you wouldn't put on the chetachila, but b'diavad, if they're on, then you don't take them down. Now, if we want to figure out what cases fit into this, fine, we look to Bama as part of the definition. But it's not actually the source of the law, the source of permission. The source is actually from Pasuk. And so, in fact, we do not learn laws from the time of Bamot. Okay, so rather, the only way I know that if a non-Kohen does Kemitzah, it's not permanently invalid, it's a redo, it's only because Rav told me so. Is that true? That means that if not for Rav, I would have thought that regarding all the other things on the list, except for left hand, then Ben Betara would say, permanently invalid? Would I really think that? Look, we have a Baraita that teaches us otherwise. Vatanya. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omerim Machshir Haya Ben Betara Bechol HaPesulin Kulan. According to Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, they testify that according to Ben Betara, any of the Pesulin, any of the disqualifications listed in the Mishnah, if it was done, you can, Ben Betara says, it's okay, you could redo it. So we have explicitly in a Baraita exactly what Rav said is here said by these Tanaim. So I don't need Rav to tell me that to repeat what I already know from the Tanaim in a Baraita. V'tana, Vitanya. And furthermore, I could tell from this Baraita, V'kamas misham mimakom sheraglei hazad omdot. From the words in the Pasuk, you should take the Kemitzah from there. What do you mean from there? Tanakama, not Ben Betara, learns from this that the Kohen who's doing Kemitzah can be standing anywhere in the courtyard, and it doesn't have to be a specific spot in the courtyard, but anywhere. And he learns that Misham, from the place that the non-Kohen can stand, the person who's bringing the Korban Mincha, he can stand within one section of the courtyard. So the first few amot. So you learn from there that just like he can stand there, the Kohen too can stand there or anywhere in the courtyard. It doesn't have to be in any special spot. That's Tanakama. Ben Betara omer minayin sheim kamas bismol sheyachzir ve'achzor ve'ikmos biyamin tamud lomar ve'kamas misham mimakom shekamas kevar. Ben Betara says, I learned something else, something different from this pasuk. He says, how do you know that if the Kohen did Kemitzah with his left hand, that he should go back and redo it and do it with his right hand? How do you know that he should do that? Because it says, V'kamas misham, do the Kemitzah from there. What do you mean from there? From the place that he already did Kemitzah. He already did it once with the left hand. He did it wrong. Okay, you don't have to throw it out. Put it back and do it again. Now, V'kevan dikras tetama ketiba mali semol mali she'ara pesulin. From the source that says Kamas Misham, do it from there. It's not specifying a left hand or any specific case. It's just saying anytime you have to do it again, you can do it again from the same place. It doesn't matter if it's because of left hand or because he was not a Kohen or because he was Tameh. The reason doesn't make a difference. So see that Ben Pera, although he says left hand over here, he's just giving you an example, but he means everything on the list, and we know that from the fact that he brought the source. So we see, therefore, that we don't need Rav to tell me this chidush about Ben Betara. I know from this Baraita, these Tanaim, I know from these Tanaim about Ben Betara, and I know from this Baraita also that brings me his source, that Ben Betara would permit a redo in all cases. So therefore, back to the drawing board. What is Rav teaching us? Ela ha-kamash malan Rav, kamatz v'afilu kidesh. Ulapuke mehani tanae, tetanya, Rabbi Yosef ben Yasiyan, v'Rabbi Yehuda hanachtom amru, b'ameh demimamorim shekamas v'lo kidesh, aval kidesh pasal. Rather, Rav is coming to teach us that, according to Ben Betera, if someone who with his left hand did Kemitzah, even if he sanctified it. Sanctified means he put it into another service vessel. He placed it into a service vessel, and now that becomes sanctified to be placed on the Mizbeach. Even if he did that, still, he did with your left hand, no, forget about it. Cancel. You can go back and redo it. And this is to exclude these two other Tanaim that Rav disagrees with. As it says in the Baraita, that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Yosef, the son of Yasiyan, Rabbi Yehuda, the baker, they both say that when is this true that you can do a redo? Only if he did Kemitzah and did not yet put it into a service vessel. But if he did Kemitzah with his left hand and put into a service vessel, then even Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara would agree that there's no redoing it. And Rav wanted to tell you that he disagrees with these Tanaim. He's Rav. He's like a Tana. He can disagree. And so that's the Chidush that Rav was teaching us. V'gadamre kamasin kidesh la keman kehani tanae ula puke mitana kama. And there's another version of this discussion where Rav is actually saying the opposite. He actually agrees with these Tanaim and disagrees with the Tanakama of this Baraita, who's not quoted here, but there must have been a Tanakama since they are disagreeing. And in this version, Rav says, like these Tanaim, that according to Ben Betera, when do we say that you can do a redo if he did Kimisa but did not place the komets into a sanctified bowl? But if you already put it into a sanctified bowl, then that's it. That's permanently disqualified. And that's what Rav was coming to teach us, that he agrees with these two Tanaim against Tanakama. All right, now according to this version, we have a challenge. Matkif la Rav Nachman. Mai ka sabri hani tanae. Rav Nachman challenges those two Tanaim. Whether Rav agrees with them or not actually doesn't matter. For this question, he is bringing a challenge to those Tanaim who say that only if he put it into a bowl, then it's disqualified. So he has a question. I kemisat pisulin avodahi afagav de la abid le matan keli. If doing kemitza by someone disqualified is itself a sacrificial service, then even if he did not put it into another bowl, it should be disqualified permanently because he did a full a sacrificial service in the wrong way with the left hand, or a non-Kohen did it. So even if he didn't put it into a bowl, he already did a full service in the wrong way. And if you say that someone pasul doing kemitza is not a service, well then, just because he puts it into a service vessel, so what? That's not an action. He didn't do anything because he's pasul, so he can't do kemitza. If you're not doing kemitza, if you just take a random bunch of flour and put it into a service vessel, that's not going to make it now that's sanctified. The kemitza was not done. Yeah, that's a prerequisite. And no one did kemitza because the pasul, the kemitza is nothing. So which way are you going to say it? Either way, it doesn't make sense. Hadar amar Rav Nachman leolam avodahi ve'la gamra avodata ad David la matan keli. Afterwards, Rav Nachman thought about it and he concluded that actually the kemitza is an avodah, but it's only the beginning stage of an avodah, and it's not completed until he puts it into a vessel. Therefore, if he only started, a non-Kohen started by doing kemitza, it's part of a ritual, but it's not the completion of a ritual. So if he stops there, he can put it back and redo it. But if he does kemitza and puts it in the vessel, now that's a complete action. And that complete action is done by someone pasul. Therefore, it becomes permanently pasul. Now we ask, Iachi afilu lo kidesh, v'chi mehadar le lakomes leduchte tikdush v'lifsul. Wait, in that case, even if a non-Kohen took the kemitza and didn't put it into a new service vessel, it should still be permanently disqualified, because when he goes to do the redo, what's he going to have to do? He's going to have to put it back in the original bowl that has all the flour in it. But that bowl is itself a service vessel. So when he puts it back in that bowl, then that kometz that he had now becomes holy. And so tikdush, let that become consecrated. And now that he finished the full action, so now it's permanently disqualified. In other words, what's the difference if you put it in a new bowl or if you put it in the very same bowl? Because that's also a sanctified vessel. Amar Rabbi Yochanan zot omedet kle sharet en mekadeshin el amidat. Rabbi Yochanan has an answer. Oh, this will teach us that a service vessel can only make something holy if that's your intent. But in this case, the non-Kohen who does this, he takes it he takes the kometz. He realizes, someone tells him, no, you can't do it, you're not a Kohen. Oh, let's redo it. Okay, put it back. He puts it back with intent to undo his action so that a Kohen can come and redo it. His intent is not to sanctify it. So that's why over here, it's okay. As long as he didn't put it into a new vessel, just put it back in the same vessel. If you put it into a new vessel, then that's presumably with intent. to make it holy. If that's with intent, he's pasul, it's permanently no good. But if you put it back in the original vessel, so that's with intent just to redo it, not with intent to sanctify it, and therefore he can still redo it. Ha midat mikadishin. Wait a second. Does that mean that if he puts it back into the original vessel, it will, with intention to make it sanctified, it will become sanctified? Resh Lakish once asked Rabbi Yochanan, if you have a temple service vessel and you have some item that's disqualified and is placed into the vessel, then once you do that, although you shouldn't have done that, at that point, can you put it on the Mizbeach lechatechila? And he said, no, it does not. Meaning, even if you had intention to make it sanctified, it is not sanctified, because you see, Rabbi Yochanan said you cannot put it on the Mizbeach. Amar le en mekadeshin likarev, aval mekadeshin lipasel. But we can answer to that. No, it doesn't become kodesh to become sanctified that it can be burnt on the Mizbeach. That's not that much. But it is sanctified to the extent that it can be permanently disqualified. And therefore, that makes sense in this case, where a non-Kohen does the Kemitzah, if he puts it into a new service vessel with intention that it should be may holy, it won't actually become holy to put on the Mizbeach, but it is effective enough that now the whole thing is permanently disqualified. However, if he takes it and he says, oops, I made a mistake, and he puts it back in the original bowl, and his intent is to undo it so that a proper Kohen can come and redo it. In that case, it doesn't become sanctified. He didn't do anything because he didn't complete the whole action, and therefore that's the case where according to Ben Betera, redo is possible. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.